Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is a special presentation of Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. I was requested to provide this because of the upcoming bridge replacement over the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon. It's going to be a huge project, and we want to let contractors know, contractors of all sizes, about this act. There are so many contractors that are unaware of this act, and the employees of contractors, and even government agency contracting officers know little to nothing about this act. So I put this class together a number of years ago. I dealt with the Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act every week in my job because I was a contracting officer at the Naval Submarine Base Bangor on Hood Canal, which is a navigable waterway, and also in the shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, which is on Puget Sound, a navigable waterway. All right, so a little bit about my background. I retired after 41 years of federal government as an employee, and my last 29 years of the 41 as a federal contracting officer with the Department of Defense. Most of my experience is with construction, architect engineering, and service contracts, both pre-award and post-award. And I held every position locally with the government-wide purchase card program, which you would know as getting paid with a Visa or a MasterCard. And I started working with Apex Accelerator the day after I retired, about 5.5 years ago. So the goal of this class is for you to become aware of the act, the impact on you, and where to turn to seek assistance. As many of you know, there are contract requirements for liability insurance to work on a federal installation, but many of you know little or nothing about this act and the insurance to protect you from bankruptcy. Many government contracting officers know little to nothing about the act, as I mentioned, and so both sides of the party know little about this act. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in chat, and I will answer all your questions at the end during our Q&A session. This PowerPoint presentation and the list of Washington navigable waterways, which is 7 pages long, will be sent to you after this class. The class is being recorded and will be available for viewing in about a week. So let's get down the road to enlightenment. Our agenda for today, I'm going to give you some background about the act, the insurance requirements, the impact on you, the employer, when it's applicable, who to contact for help, and we got a little quiz here to see how well you comprehended the information that I provided, and a summary, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. Some abbreviations. DLHWC, that's the Division of Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation. They are with the Department of Labor. Our closest office is in Seattle, where it is manned by 4 full-time attorneys that all they do is help clients with claims against the Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. DOL is Department of Labor. There is the abbreviation for the act, LNHWCA. OWCP, Office of Workers' Compensation Programs. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, and 2 important terms when it comes to this act. It is situs and status. Situs is where's the work being where's the location of the work being performed, and status is the type of work you are doing. We'll get into further details on that. Those are 2 important terms associated with the act. Background. The act was passed in 1927. It was expanded via amendments in 1972 and 1984. Citizen status. Situs is a location of work. So here's a couple of examples. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard or the Coast Guard Air Station at Port Angeles. So those are locations. That is situs. Status is the type of work you are doing, such as working on in a production facility for vessels. We'll talk more about that coming up. So you don't necessarily have to be working over, on, under, or next to a navigable waterway. In Western United States, if you are any distance away working in a facility that supports ships tied up at a dock on a navigable waterway, that is covered in the Act also in Western United States. So the Act provides compensation, medical treatment, and vocational rehabilitation for employees that get injured, sick, or die. Well, they're not going to get vocational rehabilitation if they're died, but the Act covers employees who get injured, ill, or die on the job. Coverage everywhere in the United States. So this is important here. The Act applies to all covered contractor employees, regardless of federal, state, county, city, ports, commercial, or private industry. So the main thing to take away on this here is it is not for employees working on a federal contract. It is employees of your company working for anybody that hires your company, where you're going to be working over, on, under, or next to a navigable waterway. Okay, so if it's a state job, a county job, a city job, or your next door neighbor hires you and you're going to have employees perform the work, the Act applies to you. So this is really important to know this. Insurance requirements. So Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act, it covers employees in traditional maritime occupations, such as longshore workers, ship repairers, ship builders, ship breakers, harbor construction workers. It does not cover vessel crews. So the ship's captain, the first mate, the engineer on the ship, it doesn't cover them. They are covered under the Jones Act. The Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act covers non-maritime workers not covered by state workmen's compensation benefits that perform work on, over, under, next to a navigable waterway. I've identified here some examples in the state of Washington of navigable waterways. Examples: State of Juan de Fuca, Puget Sound, Lake Washington, Kitsap Lake in my backyard, Columbia River. This is what we're talking about, the bridge on the Columbia River. The Columbia River is a navigable waterway. The Chehalis River. And for Western U.S., for the western part of the United States, it also includes work inland supporting vessels on navigable waterways. In green there, I've identified that for the state of Washington, there are 103 navigable waterways. And it is the United States Coast Guard that determines whether a waterway is a navigable waterway or not. Let's take a moment here, and this is a handout. It's 7 pages long of the navigable waterways of the state of Washington. This is a handout that we're going to be sending to you after this class. So of course, Columbia River is on here, but all the rivers and lakes and saltwater bodies in the state of Washington are all included on this. And you can go to the bottom website, which is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the state of Washington, state of Oregon, and look up the navigable waterways for the state of Oregon. And you can do it for any state in the United States. Okay, Washington, labor and industries. If you are an employee working over, on, under, or next to a navigable waterway and are hurt or made ill or die by the job, you may not be covered by Washington workers' compensation. I actually had an experience as the contracting officer at the Naval Submarine Base Bangor about a year before I retired. So this would be about 2017, where at night a subcontractor's employee was working down on the pier on the Hood Canal where a ship was tied up next to it. There was a storm that night, and the waves were pushing up the ship against the pier. That employee fell off the pier into the water between the pier and the ship, and a wave pushed the ship up against the pier and crushed the man. He died instantly. The family pursued a claim with the Washington State L&I, Labor and Industries, which quickly denied the claim. The reason why? The state of Washington does not pay claims around navigable waterways. Who would know that? So then the family found out about this act, Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, contacted the Department of Labor's office in Seattle, talked to an attorney there, and that office helped them submit a claim to the subcontractor. Of course, it was for loss of life. It was millions of dollars in the claim, and the company did not have the insurance for the act. And so they didn't have enough money in savings or in their line of credit from a financial institution to pay the claim. And so they had to start selling off their assets. Sold off all their assets. There was still a balance on the claim. And as a result, the company went bankrupt. The act states that the principals of the company are then held responsible for paying the balance of the claim. So in this case, the president, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasurer personally had to pay the balance of the claim out of their own pockets. That's why I put this class together. It is so important for you to understand the nuances of this act and the liability for your company. When you are working, you have employees that are performing work around the navigable waterway, you want to get this insurance. And we're going to talk more about this later in the class of, are you subject to the act? And if so, where do you find insurance policies to cover you? Not all insurance companies sell this insurance. So there's a select few around the country, and I will show you how to get that information to contact those insurance companies. And for the most part, the contractors and subcontractors on this bridge replacement project on the Columbia River are going to need this insurance. All right, so what do we got here? Okay, second paragraph. Instead, you may be covered by the Federal Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act. Right. Okay, impact to the employer. I've underlined some key words in this paragraph. If the act applies to you and you do not have the insurance and there is a claim due to injury, illness, or loss of life, your company is liable to pay the claim. And if the company has insufficient funds, then the principals are personally liable. You may have questions on that during the Q&A session. Applicability. All right, so here are some examples that apply and some examples that don't apply. All right, so under applicable, production buildings supporting vessels, that applies. Installation of utility systems which will provide service to a vessel. Demolition of a facility which is replaced with a production facility. So all these apply. If you have a contract and you're dealing with these, you are subject to the act. Examples which are not applicable: administrative buildings, facilities providing retail services, bachelor enlisted quarters, that's what BEQ is, family housing, garages, parking lots. Take note of this one: repairs to utility systems, even if they provide services to a vessel. So you will see that one up above under applicable also, but the difference I have underlined. The one on top is installation of a utility system. The one below is repairing a utility system. Note the difference between those. Next, facilities for labor unions. Demolition of a facility which is not replaced. So up above, we said demolition of a facility which is replaced with a production building is applicable to the act. And down below, if it's demolition of a facility that is not replaced with another building, it's not applicable. Delivery drivers. So you have a contract, you're working out a navigable waterway in a construction project like the bridge on the Columbia River, and you are placing orders with companies for materials so you can do your work, and they provide delivery service. So they load up their van or their semi truck or whatever, and they deliver it out onto the site, offload it, and they depart. Those drivers are not subject to the act. That's an example for you. Also, in one of the amendments to the act is aquaculture. Can you imagine that? The companies that have those fish farms out on Puget Sound, they must have had a great lobbying group because they are exempt. And they are right on Puget Sound or in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and they're farm fishing, agriculture, they're exempt. Who would know? Who would guess that? Applicability. The Western United States courts have a wider interpretation of the act, which includes work inland supporting vessels on a navigable waterway. So, a couple of examples. If a production building at Sandpoint, Idaho, repairs vessel components for ships at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, then the workers may be covered by the act. Okay, so that's a state away. That's in Idaho. But the courts in the western part of the United States have interpreted the act to include those services inland if they are supporting the vessels that are tied up on a navigable waterway. That is not the case on the Gulf of Mexico or the East Coast. In those cases, the courts say it has to be over, on, under, or next to the navigable waterway to be subject to the act. On the West Coast, it's different. It can be inland. Another great example is the Naval Submarine Base Bangor, which is a couple of miles north of Silverdale, Washington. It's on Hood Canal. We say there that there is a lower base and an upper base. The lower base is down in the Hood Canal where the ships are tied up, the submarines are tied up, and whatever. And the upper base has facilities that support those ships and submarines that are tied up on the lower base. So if a worker is in there, and that's a couple of miles inland, Bangor is a very huge base. And so if there is work being done in those buildings in the upper base that is directly connected to providing service to the ships and the submarines down on the Hood Canal, the act applies to them also. Just like this example here for Sandpoint, Idaho. There's a submarine facility over there. And so if they're doing repairs for vessels that are here in the shipyard or the submarine base, Bangor, the act applies to them also, the employees working there. Example number 2, so this is the example that I was given to you. A production building on upper base, Bangor, supports the ships tied up at the pier on Hood Canal, then the workers may be covered by the act. Who to contact for help? When in doubt of the coverage under the act, contact the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Worker Compensation Programs, Seattle, Washington. There are 2 phone numbers there for you. Area code 415 and area code 206. The director of that office is Mr. Todd Brunex, and he rotates between 3 offices on the West Coast. He's in charge of the Seattle office, the San Francisco office, and the Honolulu office in Hawaii. So he rotates, spends equal amount of time to all 3 of them. But any one of the 4 lawyers in the Seattle office will pick up the phone and talk to you. They can also refer you to insurance policy providers. So some of the dialogue that you're going to have with them, they're going to ask you a lot of questions in order to determine whether your employees are subject to the act. So when you put your cost proposal together to compete for the award of the contract, you're going to want to know if you're going to have to buy an insurance policy. So some of the questions that the lawyers are going to ask you is, what's the classification of the employees that are going to be working on the contract? Where are they going to be working? You know, what kind of, you know, what are they doing? So maybe not all of them are going to be subject to the act. So when you put your cost proposal together, the insurance premium is based on the labor portion of your cost proposal, not equipment, not materials. It's the labor. When I was a contracting officer, I told my government estimators to put in 23% and apply it against the labor for our government estimates. 23% is an average of on the range from like 18% to 27%. So it depends. What your rate's going to be is based on your historical practice, your safety record, whatnot. So I just used an average 23%. That's what I would tell my government estimators to put in their government estimate. But for you, I mean, you want to save money as much as possible and be competitive. So you want to have this conversation with the lawyers in the Department of Labor office in Seattle, where they're going to be asking you what kind of employees, where are they going to be working, so on and so forth. And they'll say, well, okay, so this group of employees are subject to the act and these employees are not. So now you only need to get insurance for those employees who are covered by the act. And if you don't have an insurance provider, they can even help you with that. I think I have another slide. Okay, so there's 4 categories of insurance providers. The very smallest one is called nuisance insurance policies. And that's where maybe just have a couple employees, a few hours a day, a few hours a week that you need to get insurance for. And so those are called nuisance insurance policies. And they can refer you to those companies that issue those liability insurance policies. And then there is at the other extreme end, the companies that sell insurance policies for when you have a contracting employees where the majority of the employees are going to be covered by the act. And so you're going to need a big policy. So the Department of Labor can refer you to a few insurance companies that sell those policies. And then there's a couple other providers in between those extremes. All right, so we're moving on now to Q&A. My computer's going, battery's running low. I'm going to plug it in just a moment. Okay, so turn on your microphones and shout out your answers, true or false. The act is only for employees on federal contracts. True or false? That is correct. It is false. It is regardless if it's federal, state, local, school board, Port of Seattle, or your next door neighbor hired you and you're going to have an employee working on it. So the key word there is hiring employees to perform the work. If you enter into a contract with somebody and you're going to perform it yourself and you're the owner of the company, you don't need the insurance. This is for employees of your company. Okay. Question 2, the act provides for compensation, medical treatment, and vocational rehabilitation. True or false?
True.
True. That is true. Number 3, the act covers only contractor employees in the state of Washington.
False.
False. That is correct. It is false. The act covers all contractors, employees everywhere in the United States, regardless if it's federal, state, county, or city, it doesn't matter. Commercial also. Number 4, principals of a company may be responsible to pay the balance of a claim.
True.
True. Okay, that's the scary part of this act. You know, you don't have enough money in the bank and you don't have a line of credit with a financial institution to pay the claim, then you're going to be selling off assets to pay the claim. And if there's a balance, then the principals of the company are personally responsible for paying the balance on the claim. This is why you need to have the insurance. That company that I was telling you about back in 2017, that company doesn't exist anymore. They went bankrupt because the loss of life, that of course was millions of dollars on a claim, they don't exist anymore. They're gone. Number 5, on the West Coast, the act includes production buildings in Utah and Nevada supporting vessels. True or false?
True.
True.
Absolutely. So the thing to keep in mind here is the West Coast is different than the rest of the United States. If you're a Gulf Coast company in one of those states or on the East Coast, you know, Virginia, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, or whatever, the courts interpret the act differently. There, you actually have to be by the navigable waterway versus the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, California. If you are working inland and what you are doing is supporting vessels tied up on the navigable waterway, the act applies to you. Okay. Oh, I'm providing the answers there. There you go. All right. Summary: situs and status. These are 2 terms that you need to remember. Situs is location of work. Status is the type of work you are doing. Companies have gone bankrupt because they didn't have the insurance. Don't go out of business because you didn't have the insurance. Here's some learning resources for you. When you receive this PowerPoint presentation electronically, all you're going to have to do is click on these websites. So the Defense Base Act is for overseas. The Jones Act is for ship's crew. OWCP, Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, and navigable waterways. That's what the Coast Guard determines what is a navigable waterway. You can go to that website and find all the navigable waterways for every state in the United States. All right, we're going to open up to question and answers. Do we have any in the chat? Maybe one?
Yes, we do. First question came from Lillian Stevenson, and she would like to know, how does this work for Oregon-based businesses?
It applies to every company in the United States that has employees who work on around navigable waterways. So it's not just the state of Washington, it's every state in the United States. And it's regardless if it's a federal contract, a state contract, a county, a city, a school district, IBM, Amazon, it doesn't matter. If you're working around navigable waterways, the act applies to you. Did I answer your question?
Sort of. So I guess my question is, you talked about L&I and it not being covered by L&I. If you have another workers' comp, is it not covered by any workers' comp? Or is it just, there are only specific workers' comps that cover waterways work?
Yeah, so every state is different. In the state of Washington, labor and industry does not accept claims for illness, injury, or death on a navigable waterway. State of Oregon might, but you'll have to inquire with them.
Okay.
Okay, great question. Next question.
Okay, the next question came from Sharon Maxwell, and she needs some clarification on the slide under the claim and employer responsibility.
What slide was that? Employer impact?
I believe so, where you said that if you don't have enough, if the insurance doesn't pay it all, the employer is responsible. And I wanted to find out, you know, how can we protect ourselves from having to come out of pocket?
By paying for an insurance policy. So the example that I was giving is the company did not have an insurance policy for navigable waterways. And as a result, the family went to the Department of Labor, contacted the office in Seattle, talked to one of the attorneys there, and the attorney helped them put together a claim and send it to the subcontractor who didn't have the insurance. And so then they have to go to their savings, to their line of credit to pay the claim. And if that does not enough money, then they got to start selling off their assets to pay the claim. And even after doing that, they sold all their assets, the company doesn't exist anymore, and there's still a balance on the claim, then it's a personal liability for the officers of the company, the president, the vice president, secretary, and the treasurer.
And so what insurance companies, how would we go about getting that type of insurance?
So a lot of companies do not provide insurance coverage for Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. So my best advice for you, and to do it expeditiously, is to contact the Department of Labor. Local office is Seattle, and I provided the phone numbers there for you to contact them, and they will provide you insurance, names of insurance companies, phone numbers and whatnot, so you can get an insurance policy to cover you during the performance of your contract.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
Uh,
Manny, I saw your image up there. Are you in on this?
Oh, yeah, I have some questions.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm asking in the context of the Northwest 8A MAC, right? So
Yeah.
the contract, the IDIQ, they didn't ask us to provide longshoreman insurance, up front, right? But
Right.
recently, we've been adding that to our estimates.
Yeah.
Um, and we're making sure we RFI to ask if it's applicable to that job. But as you know, there's multiple jobs on this task order, or on this IDIQ,
Yeah.
and there will be many more, over the next 3 years. And some of them, like there's a dog kennel on there that doesn't support vessels, right? But
Right.
there's an argument that anything on all these Navy bases support the fleet, right? And vessels, no. So it really is a task order by task order evaluation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And within the task order, in the statement of work, not all the employees are subject to the act. And so when it's in question, when it's in doubt, contact the Seattle office of the Department of Labor and ask those lawyers those questions, and they will tell you whether those individual employees, you can talk about every work category of employees that you have performing on that task order, and they will break it down and they will say, okay, that group of employees are covered by the act. That group of employees is not. And with that information, then you can go to the insurance company and say, I need coverage for these employees. And this is the dollar value of those employees performing on this task order. I need to get insurance for it. What's it going to cost me? And then you can put that in your cost proposal and submit it to Naval Facilities Engineering Command, and you're competing for the award of that contract, or excuse me, that task order, and that's how it works. So in this case, and this is another thing that I talk about in my class for price and cost proposal preparation, is insurance and indirect costs. So if you're a company that the preponderance of your work is on navigable waterways, like one of the MAC contracts is for NAVFAC Northwest, it's what do they call it? Waterfront?
The waterfront MAC, yeah.
Waterfront MAC. The majority, if not all of those requirements, are on the waterfront. So they're going to have this insurance for every one of their task orders. So in that case, they would put it in their indirect costs, their general and administrative or home office overhead, whatever you want to call it. They're all interchangeable terms. Instead of as a direct cost in their cost proposal, it's in their indirect cost. In your case, you may or may not have task orders on waterfront, but when you do, then for that cost proposal that you're putting together for that request for a proposal, you want to contact and have that conversation with the Seattle Department of Labor and find out just which employees are subject to the act, and then you only want to get the insurance for those employees, and then put it in as a direct cost in your cost proposal. And then when you're awarded the task order, you've got the money to pay for that insurance policy because it's in the price of your contract.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, without asking the lawyers, it's probably the direct labor folks, right? None of the administrative or even construction superintendents might not be covered. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, it's not 100% of your employees are going to be covered by the act. I'm going back to where am I going back to? Let's see.
And the subs are responsible for their own insurance, right?
Yes, but as you are probably very well aware of, is when lawsuits are filed, they go for the entity with the deepest pockets, right? So if the employee is an employee of a subcontractor and the subcontractor doesn't have the insurance to pay for it, typically what happens then, they go up to the next company to go after the money to compensate the individual or the family for the injury, illness, or the loss of life. It will keep working up.
Well, then, but how do you cover that? You can't cover every employee for every sub, can you? That makes my policy very expensive.
Right. So what you could do as the prime contractor or the next tier, and you're going to subcontract out, you're going to require that subcontractor to have that insurance because that helps you too. And they're going to provide a copy of the certificate of insurance for Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act and provide it to you. And maybe you're going to want that to make sure that they've included it in their cost proposal to you, and that if they win the subcontract, then within X number of days, they have to provide a copy of the certificate of liability insurance.
Got it.
Now, when I was the Navy contracting officer, I would receive regularly, after we award a task order or a contract, within 10 days, typically is what the contract requirement is that the company has to provide the certificate of liability insurance. And so I would get that general liability insurance certificate, but I would also get a separate insurance certificate from a surety providing the insurance for Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act. And it would be identified on the certificate, Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act insurance. And there's the premium there and the coverage and whatnot. So I would get two insurance certificates because typically, like I said earlier, most insurance companies do not sell policies for the act. And so the company then had to go out to another insurance company to get that certificate of coverage. And then I, as the Navy contracting officer, had two certificates for that task order or that contract.
Okay.
Okay.
More fun.
All right. Next question, anybody?
So Terry, Sharon, I don't know if this still applies, but she asked, how can you make sure that you, the owner, are not responsible? And I can appreciate, the overwhelming aspect of this as a small business owner.
I'm not sure what the question is. How do you know if you're subject to the act?
No, it's more just about, I think, with having the insurance, but does the insurance, is that going to give us full protection is my question, I guess.
Well, you're going to discuss the coverage with the surety as to how much coverage you want. And keep in mind that it's only for the employees who are subject to the act. So quite often it's not 100% of your employees are going to be subject to the act. And that's why you want to have a discussion with the Department of Labor office in Seattle to determine which employees that are going to be performing on your contract or task order are subject to the act. And you're going to
Gotcha.
contact an insurance company and say, I need coverage on the act for this group of employees. And this is the dollar value in my cost proposal for this group of employees. What is the insurance premium going to cost me for those employees?
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, just as a reference point, I reached out to my broker and those are the questions they asked. You know, what
Yeah.
who are the employees? What do they do? You know, where are they working? So
Yep.
the whole list of questions related to what exactly the worker's doing.
Absolutely. Right.
This coverage, yeah.
So Manny, going back to your previous question, I'm putting up this slide here. So if you have a task order and we're looking at the list here of examples of not applicable to the act, if you are working doing renovations in administrative buildings are exempt from the act. Facilities providing retail services like the Navy Exchange, the commissary, those are retail services. MWR also. Barrackses, housing is exempt. Garages and parking lots. If you got a task order or contract to do repairs or build a garage by a navigable waterway, it's exempt. Okay. If you're doing something for the labor union on the military base, outfitting their office or building an office or a building or whatever, it's exempt. Facilities for unions are exempt. So there's a list. Delivery drivers, demolition of a facility that is not replaced with another building. That demolition contract is exempt, even though it's by a waterway.
Well, we have a standard RFI now for each task order. Is this subject to the Longshore Insurance Act? So we're putting the monkey on NAVFAC's back to say, yeah, that's a production facility. Because on the surface, sometimes, you can't recognize if it is or not. I have, knowledge of the base. So a lot of times I could say, in my mind, that's not a production facility, so it's not applicable. But to be safe, it's just a standard RFI, which generates, our question to our brokers about how much it's going to cost. And then that, feeds into our estimate. So.
Yes. So in my latter years, when I was working at the shipyard, I changed my course of action in not identifying in my solicitation whether the facility was subject to the act or not. I put the onus on the contractor to make that determination and get the insurance coverage that they felt was needed for their employees. And
well, you just want to make it hard for the contractor.
Well, it comes down to liability because, as the Department of Labor office in Seattle told me one time, is that then the liability is on me. If I said in the solicitation that it's not subject to the act, and after the fact in performance, there was an illness, injury, or death, and the Department of Labor said, oh, that is subject to the act, it's on me then. So that is when I changed my course of action. And I didn't say whether it was covered by the act or not in the solicitation. I put the onus on the contractor. They have to go out and make that or have that discussion with the Department of Labor or with their sureties and whatnot and get that insurance. And if they decide it was the employees would be subject to the act, then they would get that certificate and provide it to me and I would put it in the file.
Yeah, but before we go to the attorneys, it's 20 questions back to NAVFAC, right? Is this utility supporting the vet? Is this a new utility? Is this,
Yes.
production facility? Is this?
Yes, I agree that
yeah.
is a correct line of questioning to the agency's contracting officer when it is unknown if that building supports the vessels down on the waterfront. That is a legitimate, and that question needs to be asked, because if it's in question, ask the question. Is that a production building that supports the vessels down on the waterfront? The answer comes back, yes. It's covered by the act. Unless it's one of these examples that I've given here, administrative building, a retail service, a housing or whatnot. But if it's, we think this is a production building that supports the vessels, I'm going to send a question to the contracting officer. Is it? And it comes back, yes, it is. Okay, then I better start figuring out if I need insurance for the act.
Yep.
Okay,
Oh.
any other questions?
Actually, Sharon had a really good question. She wants to know where they can get information on what's being led on the project to know what they can go after. It's a big project, and do we have any resources? So right now, I just posted Julia's information in the chat for Sharon. And there's what's it called, the IBR project,
Yeah.
Oregon, let me look. Yeah, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. And let me send you this link here also. Yeah, I don't know if everybody has that or not.
I would say too, if you go to the website, the Interstate Bridge, on there, they have a lot of resources and other helpful guidelines and things that you can go to. There's a lot of work around trying to make sure that we can do right-sized projects for everybody who's involved and or who wants to be involved. So, I mean, they have it currently broken down, I think, into 28 packages, and the smallest one that I saw on there was 1 to 5 million. So depending on the size of your company and where you are, if that's something that you can take on or not. But
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I don't see any more questions. Anybody else? Manny, Julie, Johnny? Any thoughts, comments, or concerns?
So as I said, you will receive this PowerPoint presentation after today's class. So you will have all the information on all of these pages. You will also have the links to get more information. You'll have the contact information for the Department of Labor office in Seattle, so you can call them. So you'll have all this information in the PowerPoint after this class today. And also we're going to send you the State of Washington Navigable Waterways handout, the 7 pages.
I have one more question, and that is in regards to partnerships with smaller companies to go after work. Is there a resource list or a list of companies that have asked for how they can partner with other smaller companies in order to build capacity to take on these contracts as well? That would be really helpful, because we could break the packages up where we're sharing that responsibility. Someone does the first half, based on what we can bond or whatever like that. I think this would be a great opportunity, just for networking.
I will just answer your question. If you go to that IBR page, one of the things they're asking for is capability statements for smaller GCs and smaller companies that want to get involved. So you want to going on there and find out where to send your capability statement so that they can do matchmaking. And then you can get signed up for notifications, and they'll let you know when they have matchmaking events coming up.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, it's a good thing that some of these participants showed up today, because they're worth their weight in gold. Those of us that are not affiliated with the project, we're just filling in for Julia. We could find the information, but it would take us a little while. So thank you, Lillian and Sharon and Manny, Julie, and Johnny for coming to hang out with us today.
Right. Okay, so we have 5 people attending today.
Yes.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great evening.
All
Okay,
right.
so my last slide
you.
is thank you for attending U.S. Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act. there's my name and there's my email address. If we have any questions after the class in the days and weeks and months to come, go ahead and send it to me. I'm more than happy to help you as much as I can, because this is a pretty much obscure act that a lot of agency contracting officers know little about, and companies know little about, and certainly the employees who work for companies know little about. So I think this is a really important subject to protect companies from bankruptcy, is to get that insurance policy. And certainly you'll get the money to pay for the premium by including it in your cost proposal to win the award of the contract. Okay? So you're not going to lose money on it. You just include that premium cost in your cost proposal. So the hard part is how many employees that you're hiring are subject to the act, and where do you get the insurance for it? So you call the Department of Labor, the phone numbers that I provided, and have that conversation with them, and they can give you leads to insurance companies that provide the insurance policies. There you go.
Thank
That's-
you.
Thank you, Gary.
All
Thanks,
right,
Terry.
thank you.
Have a great day.
All right, you
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.